Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 124th Right and Left Discussion Forum. Before we begin today, I would like to take a moment here on the cusp of Memorial Day weekend to pay our respects to our brothers and sisters who paid the last full measure and on the battlefields of the world, and those who returned with the battlefields with them physically and emotionally, and that we certainly do thank them for what they've done for us. We hold our panel discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Recently, our Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine certified the language of the Marijuana Rights and Regulations Amendment. If the supporters of the amendment can collect at least 305,591 signatures by July 4th, the measure will be on the November Ohio ballot. If approved by voters, people aged 21 and older will be allowed to possess, produce, transport, use, sell, and share cannabis. The question before our panel is, will Ohio be better off if this issue passes? Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Tom Finley, co-founder of Great Lakes Resource Center. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. And on his left is Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council. Tom, beginning with you, very simply, do you think Ohio will be better off if this legislation is passed?
Very simply, I needed to tell a quick story, but my answer is yes, and then I'll explain that. As a school principal, I engineered in 1970 a purchase of drugs on the playground. The purchaser of the drugs was a dealer, sixth grader. So even then, tremendous problem. The second story I'll make very quickly is my daughter-in-law, with back surgery and the painkillers that followed, became addicted. Her husband did not know that. She worked about 4 doctors to get what she needed until that was discovered. They were very successful in business. She took care of the books, subsequently embezzled over $200,000 in a year to support her habit. Bob, of course, found out, rehab, none of which worked. He took away that money. She went to the streets, prostituted herself. He stopped that. He has been paying since, trying to get her to rehab. It is no results that have been effective. That's over 20 years. He spends about $200 a week buying drugs illegally to take care of his wife as she deteriorates. So that's the story of, so it's not a typical, if you will, where we think about crime and all that sort of thing, except it did involve crime, just no courts. So my answer is yes, and I qualify that.
Yeah, let me repeat. Yeah, you're saying yes, that Ohio will be better off if recreational cannabis is legalized.
Yes, it's a good first step, and it needs to recognize what we learned about the prohibition and trying to prohibit the use of a substance. I think the key strategy, when I say yes, this is a beginning where we ought to legalize drugs. And the strategy around the legalization of drugs is to take away the profit motive, because that's what's driving everything now. America is the best market for the cartels and that sort of thing. The steps, there are 3 of them. You do need to legalize the drug usage, and this is what I would suggest that would go up with those laws, that government dispensaries in hospitals would be the facilities that supported the free drugs, no strings attached, and they would have ongoing rehab centers where, again, it wasn't 3 months, and that sort of thing. That's the first thing. Second thing would be to implement in the schools a curriculum based upon a positive approach to managing your health that was focused on nutrition and the management of body, mind, and emotions. The third would be to set harsh laws then for people who chose to move outside that circle and buy drugs from dealers, for both the dealer and the user. That's it in a nutshell. So that's my yes.
I have a question on that. If I hear you right, you're in favor of legalizing the use of cannabis, but you would have harsh penalties on people who sold it.
Once it was free.
Oh, I see. You would have to buy it like you buy alcohol in
You wouldn't
Ohio
buy it. I would not even, I would have it at a hospital where it was the availability of treatment for anyone who abused it.
Sort of the Portugal model.
Well,
We can talk about that in a
yes.
little bit. Ron, what's your thinking on it?
Well, you're extending this a bit beyond just marijuana, from what I understand you're saying.
Yes, this is the
Which
first
is fine.
step.
And it's another degree of involvement here. As far as marijuana is concerned, yeah, I agree it would be a good thing. And I'm looking, again, you mentioned prohibition. It's a bit like alcohol, as I understand it. I've never used marijuana. I am an alcohol user, and I hope a
Responsible
reasonably
one?
responsible.
Oh, I
and-
hope you
and-
are too, Ron.
And not very,
Yeah.
not very often either. I mean,
Yeah.
a little wine with dinner, you know. So it has the problems because there are folks who can't handle it, just as there are folks who can't handle alcohol, and that has to be worked out. There are problems with operating machinery. There should be the same kind of penalties there as there are with alcohol. So I think a control, whether it, and I don't know if I go so far as to the free. I mean, it's not free. Government has to pay for it. That means we have to pay for it. I think the profit motive is probably not a bad thing in this case, but keep it legal. Keep it. That will keep, because of the competition. This should keep the price reasonable for marijuana. People are going to go on and do other things, I'm sure.
Can I read
and maybe
between the
that's the
lines
next
in your
step.
comment that you would think that if the cannabis was decriminalized, more people would use it or less?
I think more would.
More would?
I think probably more would. I'm
Brian,
gonna try it.
what do you think, Brian? Would they or wouldn't they?
Well, seeing that we're talking about grass, I thought I'd put in my public service announcement here at the beginning of summer for everybody out there that likes to mow their grass down to the nub. I want you to get your push mower up to the highest setting and let that grass grow. It just pains me when I see people out there in their yard just mowing it down to the dirt. And good. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for your grass. Just get that mower up and mow it up as high as you can. And if you've got a riding lawnmower, 3.5, 4 inches, it'll do better in August. It'll do better when we don't get as much rain.
Chokes out a lot of the weeds.
Chokes out a lot of the weeds. There we go. There's another little weed. A little reference there to the marijuana. I am not in favor of legalizing marijuana. I believe we have medical marijuana in the state of Ohio now, don't we?
Yes.
So people that have issues, like Tom's daughter-in-law, maybe she could go on a regimen of medical marijuana. I think there's some consequences that people have a tendency to ignore, and we're starting to see those consequences come out of Colorado. Colorado has passed laws that basically have legalized marijuana. And the problem that I see is that employers suffer because most employers have drug testing. And if you've tested positive, and they're sophisticated tests, they won't hire you because employers are held responsible for their employees. And if you have an employee that is, using marijuana or using a drug, and they're operating a piece of machinery for you, or they're on your premises and there's an accident, you're going to be held liable for that. So there's a lot of other things that go into this, other than saying, okay, let's just take away the profit motive. we're not thinking about the downstream effects. And, you know, you look at Colorado, they're suffering from that. Insurance rates go up. People don't think about that because there's always someone out there that slips through the cracks, and next thing you know, they have an accident. They've been driving the employer's car or their truck or a piece of heavy equipment, and next thing you know, you have a $3 million liability case on your hands. So employers are not exempt from this. We're not saying, oh, now you can use it, and the employers won't suffer for it. You know, a good friend of mine was part of a hiring team when all the fracking businesses came, and they were looking to fill 100 drivers. And of the 300 people that they tested, it was like 10%, like 30 of them could get through a drug screen. Now, if you can't pass, you know, the drug screen, I'm not sure what you're going to do productively in society. So I think instead of just saying, okay, we're going to take away the profit motive, we're going to let people do this because it's going to be that way anyway. Employers, those that have to hire, are really going to suffer for this. Mm-hmm. And we as a society are going to suffer because I just don't think it's really the direction we need to head in. I'm all for education, I'm all for that kind of stuff, but to say, let's just legalize it and the problems will go away, I don't believe it will. I think it's going to get worse.
I had an employer tell me that if we were still doing drug testing, we wouldn't hire anyone.
Well, and they're having a very difficult time finding people to fill those slots.
1 out of 8, I think, was the number that I heard could actually pass a drug screening. Patty, what do you think?
You know, this is an interesting topic, and I have really mixed feelings on it. I was in favor and am in favor of the medical marijuana. I think that it is proven to be a helpful drug for those that are suffering for, you know, taking chemo treatments and so forth. It's one of the few drugs that would actually make you eat more and increase weight, but they've also used it for epilepsy, for treatment with Alzheimer's, and a number of different things. The interesting thing I was telling Bryan beforehand, when you look up pros and cons, you know, whether it's good or bad, it's like each side has this just totally opposite claims as far as the drugs are concerned. You know, one say that it will harm you physically, that it's a gateway drug. The other will say, no, it will not harm you physically. It's not a gateway drug, and so forth. One of the things, though, I think is really important when legalized, and the way it might help, is that you now put under control that drug and its dispersal, so that you don't see the fentanyl being added into it. You don't see all of the extra additives that make that drug dangerous. I mean, it's virtually impossible to overdose on marijuana. Now, obviously, you can overdose on opioids and other things, but you can't on that drug. And when it is controlled and sold from a dispensary, there's a thought that we're going to see fewer people harmed with drugs. It also puts, you know, as Tom was mentioning, it puts those that are selling the drugs illegally out of business. And even if you sell it for a price, you are still going to be selling it cheaper. There are concerns that smoking marijuana is as dangerous as smoking cigarettes. It really hasn't been proven yet, but I think that that's a fair argument. However, there's edibles that can be used to take marijuana so that you could avoid the smoking portion of that.
Well, part of this, if that was correct, an individual can actually grow it. They can grow a certain amount. Now, how do you know if you're going to dispense it? How do you know what that person has or has not done?
Well, in order to dispense it legally, it would have to be done out of an approved place.
But I'm thinking of the 20-year-old kid or the 19-year-old kid that grows it legally and then shares it with his friends.
Well, legally, they would only be able to use it for their own consumption. They wouldn't be able to share it or sell it.
Yeah, but you know that's not going to happen.
Well, but it would
You can with this bill.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the other things, though, that you have to look at, because you talked about Colorado and not being successful, they have also taken in millions and millions of dollars in taxes. And this is one of the reasons you might want to charge and put it under control, which helps the state. That money also then can be given to police forces within the communities to handle more violent crimes. You can use money for rehab programs for those that are on opioids and so forth. That money can be used in a very valuable form. Mm-hmm. Right now, the profits from this is all going to cartels.
Well, we have to remember, since man, we have been consuming alcoholic and opiates and drugs.
Right.
Since man. So that's not going to change.
No.
The cost of our war on drugs would underwrite a plan like I've just talked about, for instance, and save us huge monies. But remember, we don't even calculate the cost in our courts that are clogged up with all the crime and stuff that's related to it. We don't look at the number of people in prisons.
That's what I was thinking of.
And so we have this hidden cost in this country, literally of billions of dollars affecting every one of us, and the cost of living associated with that. So
besides
very
the racial component here, the cocaine crisis, which part of which sparked the war on drugs, was all the black folks are using cocaine. No, it was the white folks are using cocaine.
Absolutely.
And there are things go on. Marijuana with Latin Americans and musicians goes back a long way. So I think there's a whole lot of society things that are going on there, and I know there's been some problems in Colorado with the edibles, children getting hold of it, for example.
Yes.
And it hasn't been good control on how much and how strong that goes in there, because it's a variable natural drug, and it's like a lot of such herbal supplements that you can buy. You never know what the strength is.
Right.
It's a tough problem. But I'm already getting email ads for cannabis oil. I can get my free sample.
I don't go to those websites. But I just think what we're doing is we're shifting costs from prisons and all that kind of stuff, because we're going to have a population of people that aren't going to be able to work.
Mm-hmm.
They won't, because they won't be able to pass a drug screen. We're going to have
you're also making the assumption that if this bill passes, the use of cannabis is going to go up.
See, I don't think it will.
I would think so.
think it will.
I would think so, yeah, because now you're going to have people that are going to be able to grow it themselves. I don't think this is a static model that all of a sudden you decide that you can actually alter the demand of it through this particular thing and not have a downstream effect. I really don't.
If we use the example of prohibition, what happened to the consumption of alcohol? It went up. Alcoholism went up. And this is with legal, with
During
control.
My father talks about making bathtub gin.
Yes, and then all of so it's growing, bathtub gin, all of that, it goes with it. It's a parallel, it's tremendous.
And I think consumption of cannabis in all of its forms are going to go up, and we're going to be sitting here 10 years or 15 years after the fact with a population of people that will not be able to find a job, because employers are not. There's no way you can insulate an employer from this. You can't say to them, okay, we've made marijuana legal, the kid comes in, he tests positive for that, and they say, no, I'm sorry, we can't hire you. What are you going to do, force them to work? Force that company to hire that kid?
Yeah. Well, what do we do now with alcohol, Brian? What do we do with alcohol? We don't test for alcohol.
I'll tell you what, a lot of companies, if you come to work drunk,
yes,
you're gone.
You come drunk.
But it's late then.
Right, but see, we're dealing with a whole different thing when we deal with marijuana.
Well,
there's residual effects and all that kind of stuff with it. So
with the drunk employee showing up, the employer is usually in the position of picking a lawsuit. They're going to get sued no matter what they do.
Yeah.
But I wanted to discuss the Portuguese experience a little bit, but first I wanted to revisit Ron's comment about the racial component. And throughout history, the drug prohibition laws that have been passed always had a racial component to them. When cocaine became observed as a black problem, it was outlawed. When opium was a Chinese problem. It was outlawed. Alcohol with European workers spawned prohibition. Marijuana with Mexicans. LSD with the counterculture. It was legal until all those hippies were taking it. You know, but I want, for just a moment, the Portuguese were under a military dictatorship until the mid-70s. And with a military dictatorship, you can get away with prohibiting a lot of things, as long as you don't have constitutional rights and things like that. So in Portugal, there was really no drug problem under the military dictatorship. But there was a junta, and it was overthrown. And one of the first things that happened once Portugal got rid of all of its colonies and people returned from there, the drug problem just blew up in their face. It just became a tremendous problem, and that they didn't know what to do with it. And it was in the early 2000s that they decriminalized all drugs. In fact, you could have a 10-day supply. You're caught and you've got a 10-day supply of cannabis or cocaine or whatever. You're perfectly fine. If you had more than a 10-day supply, you might get something like a traffic ticket for having it, in which case you'd have to report to a rehab center and take some educational lessons and all of that. But the long and the short of all the money that they were spending on law enforcement, they now turned into education and rehab. And that users were not criminalized, they were educated and so forth. Now, what was the net result of all of this? The predictions were that if we go ahead, Portuguese, if we go ahead and legalize all these drugs, it's going to become an outrageous problem. Everybody's, the use is going to skyrocket. Well, the interesting happened is it didn't. It didn't go up. It didn't go down much either, but the dire consequences never occurred. The second thing that happened was the illnesses that are associated with sharing needles and all that, like HIV and different sexually transmitted disease, they all went down.
Yeah.
There was not, in short, there was not a huge impact on the usage of drugs or the consequences of the usage of drugs. However, you're looking at a culture now that provides a tremendous amount of education. They freed up a lot of resources like we would in this country to train. And I've mentioned it on this program before, that I don't think that we have begun to tap the power of advertising and what we can do to make a public shift like we did with cigarette smoking. But I just wanted to share that experience with Portugal, because you'd have to say that it was positive over the long run.
Yeah. I have a question about the residual effects. I don't know biologically how much residual marijuana in the system impairs one's performance.
That's one of the problems, is that their studies are really inconclusive on that, and you can see studies on both sides.
Don't you suppose it's going to be like alcohol? It's individual and how your body tolerates it.
Well, that's the thing. Like with addiction, it's and you mentioned that they may become addicted to the marijuana. It's not necessarily an addictive drug to start with. Just like with alcohol, there are those that are prone to addiction, and there are those that are not. And the same thing is going to be held true with any drug. I guess deep down I have concern about making another vice legal. I mean, I struggle with that, but yet I can see the advantage.
You'll fall right in.
Yeah.
I just come from it from the economic side. Just the employers are going to suffer. We're all going to suffer.
Assuming that the use is going to go up.
Right.
All right.
Right.
Well, again, I wonder. Okay, so I have some marijuana tonight, and I go to work tomorrow. Is that still? Am I still hungover enough from that my performance is going
Now
to be
you would
impaired?
probably on a drug test it would show up positive because
a
it
drug test
stays
should be
with
positive.
you.
For marijuana, it's in your system for a number of weeks.
Yeah.
Actually.
But I don't know that there is.
I don't know.
So the employer ramps up his drug testing program and passes on the cost to everybody else, because now instead of testing randomly every quarter or every 6 months, he starts testing every other month.
But
My
if the drug is
question
legal,
is,
do they
does it
need to
matter?
test for it then?
Or,
Well, sure they
or
are,
just shift
because-
your manufacturing to China and let them worry about it.
Well, there you go.
They're already in trouble.
That solves your problem. There you go. Send it all to Mexico. They're all high down there anyway, right?
Oh,
Is that how
sure.
you wanna-
Well,
No, I just see it needs a lot of further study. There's states out there that have done it. Let's see how it turns out for them. Give it a little while.
Well, there's 29 states have medical marijuana, correct? And how many states have?
I think only 3, Washington, Colorado,
Isn't
Didn't-
Nevada?
is it?
Yeah, because there was a special on TV
California's
about,
about ready
the
to-
growers
Yeah.
that are going to Nevada, these small towns out in the middle of the desert, and they're building these great big
Well,
facilities.
states are looking, though, at those states that have, and they're seeing the economic upturn. And you talk about it hurting companies. There is an economic upturn.
If you look
in
at the
those.
cost,
Well-
if you look at the cost and you focus on one example, the war on drugs, which is increased cost billions and each year, we're losing. There are now more drugs imported. There are no more users, et cetera, et cetera. We're losing. It is not working.
So that's the final score here.
Yeah, so what
I-
The
alternative?
war on drugs. I
I
think
think-
that would be the final score on the war on drugs.
Well, I think that we gave up a long time ago on a drug-free world. As Tom indicated, that there's archaeologists have shown that even cavemen had intoxicants of one type or another.
Throw a bunch of grapes on the table, it turns into wine, you know.
Yeah, fermentation
Yeah,
being what it is.
Even some jungle animals love the fermented fruit from the jungle floor.
Well, it's amazing. In the fall, I don't know if you've ever had this experience or not, but bees get drunk when they are
Yeah.
on the feeding on the fallen fruits that have fermented or
Yes,
whatever.
we used to have a bunch of apple trees in our backyard,
so-
and come fall, we had a lot of really
Crazy bees.
silly bees.
Take on
Well,
these.
thank you very much, folks. That was a good discussion.